Why are you coming on?
I really want to tell parents about what I think they should look for in rearing their children. Just pull out everything that you possibly can. Don't stop. Yes, talk deeply and intensely. It'll come out, I think, eventually.
Behind every serial killer is a family that raised them. While the public often turns to the mothers, perhaps a light must also be shined on the fathers. Were they absent, abusive, or lackluster? What could they have done differently? And most importantly, how did they react to the actions of their serial killing children? Join us as we highlight some of the most extreme reactions from fathers of serial killers. Julian Ramirez. Many people had different names for his son, Richard Ramirez. While Ramirez was known as the Valley Intruder to some, the Night Stalker became his most enduring moniker, which both the news media and Ramirez himself adopted. He would kill at least 13 people and engage in at least 11 sexual assaults before turning 26 in a string of seemingly random attacks that terrorized Southern Californians in the summer of 1985.
A woman in her 60s and stomped her to death with his foot, leaving an imprint of a shoe on the side of her face. From that to just executing somebody upon walking into a room after he entered a house. He strangled, he used a ligature, he used a tire iron on a young girl, beat her, left her for dead.
But let's return to the beginning. Richard Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas. According to sources, the father was allegedly physically violent to him and his siblings. Richard was just 25 years old when he was charged. Although it's difficult to pinpoint a specific event or series of events that led up to that point as the cause of his becoming a serial killer, taking a chilling look back at his life does offer some ominous hints. Richard was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children. His father, Julian, was a former soldier who worked for the Santa Fe Railway, and his mother, Mercedes, was employed at a boot factory. The kids started getting into trouble when both parents were working. Even Richard's older brother and their cousin Mike committed burglaries. When he was 2 years old, a dresser fell on his head as he reached for a radio, causing 30 stitches and a concussion. 3 years later, Richard was at a playground when a swing knocked him out. He was taken back to the hospital and given more stitches before being sent home. As a result, Richard started having seizures. Richard was given an epilepsy diagnosis that academic year, though it is unclear if the head injuries are what caused it. According to experts, this may have contributed to his disturbing visions and vivid dreams. These unsettling ideas materialized 2 years later. Richard looked up to his cousin Mike, a war hero who had returned from 2 tours in Vietnam. Mike loved to boast about his accomplishments abroad. He showed Richard the Polaroids of at least 20 women he claimed to have raped and killed. Mike also shared his military training in stealth, accuracy, and combat with Richard. He wanted him to be capable of killing and combat. Jessie, Mike's wife, wanted him to get a job, and they frequently fought over the fact that he was spending so much time with his young cousin. They fought constantly, and one day, Mike pulled out his .38 revolver on her. She dared him to shoot her, which Mike duly did in broad daylight in front of Richard and both of his children. Richard claimed that Mike's arrest is what caused him to develop an obsession with criminals, crime, murder, and death. Reading detective magazines, Richard indulged in fantasies about the ferocious sex acts he saw in Mike's photos. His grades dropped, and even worse, he started stealing, hunting, and using drugs. Richard was 15 at the time, and he landed a job where he was given a master key to a Holiday Inn's rooms by a friend. He would observe individuals through curtain openings, then sneak inside once they were fast asleep to steal valuables, but one night he desired more. A visitor was in the restroom when he tried to rape her while hiding in the closet. When her husband entered, it caught him off guard. Despite being detained, Richard's charges were later dropped because the couple refused to return to El Paso to testify. Richard made the one-way trip to Los Angeles when he was 18 and permanently left the city. The number of burglaries he committed increased as soon as he started using cocaine. He frequently drove around and slept in stolen cars while studying maps of the city's neighborhoods and freeways. When Richard began reading books by Church of Satan founder Anton LaVey, he discovered a philosophy that matched his crimes. He was reportedly staying at a hotel a few blocks from where 9-year-old May Leung lived.
Was found dead in the basement of her apartment building where she lived in the Tenderloin.
Sadly, Richard stabbed her to death. It remained a cold case until 2004 when police reopened it. They looked at the samples from the crime scene again, and it was found to match Richard's.
Collected in 1984 at the crime scene, they were able to match it with his DNA, Richard Ramirez.
The next crime linked to Richard after May Leon was when he broke into the home of a 79-year-old woman and stabbed her to death as she lay on her bed. Over the next 8 months, Richard deepened his addiction and worship of the devil. Richard became increasingly violent, killing at least 13 people, breaking in, raping and assaulting others. Richard was convicted of murder night after night, and the whole world learned of his Satanism. Even after being arrested, he showed no remorse. Rather, the infamy excited him. He wore a suit and sunglasses to court every day. For the first time in his life, he received a lot of attention outside of the trial. He even had several women fall under his dark charm. Then there was Doreen Leoy, a 25-year-old magazine editor who believed he was innocent. She wrote over 75 love letters to him and appeared in court daily. Interestingly, she agreed to get married to him.
New Mrs. Richard Ramirez.
It feels wonderful. I'm so happy. I'm so thrilled.
Richard spent most of his time on death row in San Quentin State Penitentiary. Richard died of lymphoma at the age of 53 while serving a death sentence. In the end, Michael H. Stone argued that Richard was a made psychopath rather than a natural-born psychopath. This is because the traumas and crimes of childhood abuse may have made him the Night Stalker. Richard himself had this to say in an interview.
The thing is bad seed when the baby is born. Is he already serial killer, already made, or is he created?
There may be some truth to this, as a 2014 study of mass murderers found that more than half had been physically or sexually abused. Like Richard, 1 in 5 criminals also suffered a head injury. Ramirez's father, Julian Ramirez, also blames these outside factors for his son's behavior. At first, he expressed shock and disappointment at his son's behavior, but later blamed it on his drug use. In his own words, "I believe the marijuana he's been smoking put him out of control. In my heart, I can't believe he would have arrived at that. But if the authorities there have proof, what can we do?" He told the Los Angeles Times, "How can I tell you it doesn't hurt? We haven't been in contact, but he's still my son." Shocking, isn't it? This was a man who struck fear into the hearts of Los Angeles residents in the spring and summer of 1985. A man who broke into random homes, attacked and killed its residents. At the end of the day, Richard Ramirez was still his son, John Sutcliffe. In the 1970s, England's Yorkshire and Greater Manchester regions were plagued with the serial killing activities of his son, Peter Sutcliffe, better known as the Yorkshire Ripper. Between 1975 and 1981, he attacked 7 more women in addition to killing 13 of them. Despite interviewing Sutcliffe 9 times over the course of a 5-year investigation, West Yorkshire police received criticism for failing to apprehend him after one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in British history. Sutcliffe was convicted on May 22, 1981, of killing 13 women between 1975 and 1980 and trying to kill 7 more. He was originally given 20 consecutive life sentences, which were later changed to a whole life order in 2010. Attacking women and young girls in residential areas at first, Sutcliffe later relocated to red light districts where he preyed on the area's vulnerable prostitutes. He was later apprehended by police for using fake license plates before it was discovered that he matched the description of the elusive Yorkshire Ripper. Sutcliffe admitted to the crimes and claimed that he had been directed to kill prostitutes by the voice of God. He claimed diminished responsibility as an excuse not to admit guilt to murder during his trial, but a majority of jurors found him guilty. In March 1984, Sutcliffe was moved from a prison to a high-security mental hospital after being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. In 2010, the High Court rejected Sutcliffe's appeal, declaring that he would serve a lifetime sentence and never be free. In August 2016, Sutcliffe was transferred to Hem Prison Frankland in Durham after a judge determined that he was mentally fit to be sent back to prison. Sutcliffe passed away on November 3, 2020, at the age of 74, while being held in custody and experiencing COVID-19 related complications. Although he claimed to hear voices as early as 1967, he was only diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in 1984 while he was in custody. John Sutcliffe, Sutcliffe's father, was brutally honest about his son in interviews. Although he initially found it difficult to comprehend the scope and horror of what Peter had done, he was aware of the seriousness of his crimes. He stated in an interview that he deserved to be hanged, but he also added, "I love that lad. I don't love him for what he's done. I love him for being who he is."
Obviously, as a completely law-abiding citizen, you were glad that he was caught, and you would have wished that he'd been caught right at the beginning.
Absolutely.
But is there in any sense, as a father, a feeling of tension, a partly still a feeling of, in any way, being on his side and
no,
being...
not as regards what he's become. I mean, to me, I probably think of him much as you do now, but I also remember him as he was, which was completely foreign to what he eventually became and what he is now.
Lionel Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer took the lives of 17 men between 1978 and 1991 in Milwaukee. He lured men into his home, drugged them or got them drunk, and then assaulted and tortured them. During these incidents, he took Polaroid pictures of his victims in order to revisit the experiences later. Dahmer was very particular about his method. He typically targeted Black, Asian, and Latino men, and he took their lives in the same way. After giving his victims the drug-laced alcohol, Dahmer would kill them, but it did not stop there. Right after they had passed away, Dahmer would have sex with their corpses and then dismember them. One time, he poured hydrochloric acid into the head of 19-year-old Errol Lindsay. Sadly, this victim lost his life 6 months before his daughter was born. Just like Errol, all other victims of Dahmer had big dreams and families who loved them. But of course, none of that mattered to Dahmer. According to the New York Times, he would dispose of their bones in a 57-gallon drum that he had specifically purchased for that purpose. Aside from the pictures, Dahmer made sure to keep gruesome souvenirs of his victims. From their skulls to their genitalia, he kept these body parts as mementos, some of which were only discovered after his arrest in 1991.
Has been a number of human specimens found within the apartment, and to a certain extent they have been there sometime.
The monstrous serial killing may have continued if not for a man named Tracy Edwards. Edwards was drinking with his friends at Milwaukee's Grand Avenue Mall one summer night in 1991 when Jeffrey Dahmer came up to him. The two conversed for a while as they got to know one another, but then Dahmer propositioned Edwards by inviting him back to his apartment to watch The Exorcist, drink some beer, and possibly pose for some nude photos in exchange for cash. Edwards followed Dahmer home after being enticed by the offer, but he recalls Dahmer's attitude changing almost instantly. Edwards was handcuffed, threatened with a knife, and at one point Dahmer even placed his head on Edwards' chest and said he would eat his heart. Tracy Edwards begged the murderer to spare him while handcuffed and sitting in Dahmer's apartment for 4 hours. Edwards eventually managed to escape because Dahmer had only one of his wrists handcuffed. With the handcuff still hanging from his arm, Edwards fled Dahmer's house and ran through Milwaukee's streets until he encountered a police car. He flagged it down and took the police back to Dahmer's house after telling them that Dahmer had attempted to kill him. However, the police weren't ready for what they would find. They discovered the dismembered body parts of 11 men scattered throughout Dahmer's residence. According to App News, there were boxes of body parts, torsos stashed away in a barrel of acid, and 3 human heads kept in the refrigerator. They discovered images of Dahmer's victims in various states of undress and mutilation tucked away in one drawer. Edwards did testify against Dahmer in court. When asked about his escape from Dahmer, he gave very intricate details, but went on to add that he underestimated me. God sent me there to take care of the situation. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 17 consecutive life terms in prison for every man he killed, but was eventually slain by a fellow inmate in 1994. Dahmer's parents, Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Flint, have both spoken publicly about their son. In one interview with 𝐉𝐻𝐈𝐍, Joyce claimed that 𝐉𝐎 was a normal young boy. Having a master's degree in counseling, she did believe that her son changed as early as the age of 4. According to her, he underwent a hernia operation, but by the time the procedure was done, 𝐉𝐎 was never the same. He had grown very distant, and she believes this to be a factor that may have contributed to the mental breakdown that made him a murderer as an adult. His father, on the other hand, wrote a memoir after he learned of his son's actions. Lionel 𝐉𝐎 was plagued by guilt about where it all went wrong, and how he possibly aided or could have stopped his son from heading down such a dark path. The book took a painful and reflective look into how his son became an infamous serial murderer. In an interview with Oprah Winfrey, Lionel also said, "The only signs I saw were shyness and reluctance to engage in social interactions, that sort of thing, but really no overt signs of any kind." He learned the gory details of his son's actions, just like everyone else during the trial. Lionel recalls being absent for much of Jeffrey's childhood while pursuing his doctorate degree, but he always tried to make room for deliberate bonding efforts with his firstborn son, Jeffrey. Lionel told Larry King during a CNN interview that Jeffrey never told him how he spent his days looking for dead animals when he was between 12 and 14 years old. "He just seems like a shy little boy," Lionel would always tell himself. But this is not the only way Lionel has publicly reacted to his son's crimes. After 𝐉𝐎 was killed in prison, Lionel and Joyce engaged in a custody dispute over his body. Lionel wanted the remains cremated at Jeffrey's request through his will, while Joyce fought to keep his brain intact. She strongly believed that psychological factors were at play, so she preferred to donate his brain for research purposes.
Do not have an explanation for Jeff's behavior. In the absence of an explanation for anything, we get scared. We're afraid of unknowns. So we go for prefabricated answers, such as the parents and especially the moms. And this has been a ready-made answer. Mother, the monster maker, has been the easy way out of dealing with something we just can't explain.
Jeffrey Dahmer tapes. The show did so well and even peaked at #1 on the top watched rank. Notably, while filming the docuseries, Netflix used secret tapes of Jeffrey's legal team, and they apparently did this without getting permission from Lionel 𝐉𝐎. So there were a lot of reports that Lionel was intent on suing Netflix for showing no regard to him or without due diligence. According to him, the show also paid unnecessary attention to details that weren't true. According to the reports, Lionel was not just upset that he wasn't consulted about the series, but also worried about his safety. There are so many people who did not know the exact extent of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes until Netflix picked up the show. So it is possible that there is a new set of riled-up people who might target him and even go so far as to visit his property to vandalize or harass him. But this alone might not be enough to build a case against Netflix. The truth is, while there will be some sentiment and people will always feel that they should have a say in telling their stories, but the truth is that the law will not back you up on that. The tapes in question could be considered as public records. We mean this case has been talked about over time. It was not exactly a secret case. So, claiming that the production team violated his right to privacy or publicity is not something that the law supports.